But when I entered the working world, I kind of understood a bit more about what that entailed, and that was about go-getting, sort of expressing yourself, your sort of talents. After, I don't know how many years, like 4 or 5 years, I got into a position where I could, be part of a startup business with some other people. And I had shares in this business, and it was kind of partly my own, and there's all this talk of, dividends and selling, and, my eyes like lit up. It definitely kind of creeps, up on you, creeps into your life. I mean, I was, as I alluded to, university, I, liked smoking a lot of weed. I think because of this diagnosed sort of ADD, I was looking for things to sort of anesthetize myself a little bit and to maybe quiet my mind. So I was using cocaine kind of to do that at the weekends. I was starting to sort of feel not very good about myself. It sort of would also, sort of numb, I guess, or disassociate myself with work, so that I could kind of switch off and kind of escape from that. And she, I was ready to tell her my, life story. Hi, Trina, poor me, I've got this cocaine addiction. Do you want to hear about how it started? And of course, she didn't. She was a volunteer, as I know now. And she just said to me, okay, you need to get to a meeting.
Hi, and welcome to the There's Another Way podcast with me, Adam Halverson.
And me, Pete Dolby. And you've come to the place where each episode we'll be shining a light on authentic people who have chosen an alternative path to their new normal to find another way.
Today we have a conversation with Bruce Robertson. This is an honest and reflective story about addiction, self-reflection and transition from self to others. We go into Bruce's journey that begins with the high stress and consumerism of corporate London, followed by a battle with addiction, 12-step, and the carving of a more selfless, balanced life.
Let's go. I hope you enjoy.
All right, Bruce. Welcome to the There's Another Way podcast. Thanks for coming.
Hey, dudes. How's it going?
Driving through the night to get here as well. Amazing.
Yeah, well, not quite through the night, but I left. What time did I leave? Probably about 11 p.m. after faffing. Had a nice, refreshing shandy before leaving, even though I said to myself I'd do a little dry run. But I'm just enjoying August for what it is. And I decided, I got super paranoid suddenly last night about the traffic this morning. And I just really like driving at the night. I find it quite peaceful and so there's no traffic.
And just to be clear, Bruce's van is parked outside, which is an electric camper, and it's got a single mattress in the back.
Bed on wheels, baby. Dwelling on wheels. It's the future. God, it affords me so much fun and freedom. It's just so great. It's so epic. But yeah, it does have a tiny range. So the journey is the destination. It's all about just like
70-mile charges and enjoying.
Just being present to that and just not really getting anywhere fast.
I listened to a podcast the other day, and there's a guy he lives out of a backpack and a small at that, and he's got nothing else, no other possessions, and in time he's just shrunk it down. That's all he needs. He's free to move wherever he wants. He's living in Mexico City at the moment,
Is he one of these people who identifies as a minimalist, or?
He is, I think, isn't he?
Is he? It's like a deliberate, conscious
really
thing.
Inspiring guy, and I listen, it's fantastic.
I'm trying to do that, but I just love clothes and sneakers too much. But I'll get there.
Well, on that note, so I was thinking is a good place to begin. It would be a brief background. Where was home, what was early years, and then we'll dig into, your journey from after that in London, career, and we'll dig into it from there.
Yeah, nice. Well, I think, my opening sort of gambit, calling you both dudes, should give anyone listening a bit of a clue that we haven't just met today. So this is, where we're sat now, the sort of High Wycombe area. This is where I was born. This is where I spent a lot of my formative years outside London. And then yeah, we went to university in Sheffield together. So apologies if there's any inside jokes. Yeah, and then I think probably like picking it up from, after university is probably a good place to sort of pick things up. So I didn't do very well academically, and there are reasons for that, which maybe we'll get into.
Although you got into grammar school though, right?
Obviously. Got into grammar school. So I think there's obviously some underlying intellect lurking there somewhere. But academia. I mean, well, screw it. Now we've sort of touched on it. I mean, I got a diagnosis a lot later in life, in the last 2-3 years of ADD. So, and that started to make a lot of things make sense. So, and one of them was, my inability to really focus on academia. Sitting down with books was just, just found it very difficult. So my grades as a result weren't too good. I was very easily distracted. One of those kids who had that smattered on every single school report. So I think back then it was like 12 UCAS points or something. So I managed to scrape into, I think there was like 2 universities which were kind of like, yeah, we'll have you. One of them was Sheffield Hallam. So went up to Sheffield. And again, I wasn't really too interested in academia at that point. I kind of didn't really know why I was there. I clearly struggled with academia education, and yet here I am having to do further education. But
did you feel pressure to go down that route because that's what everyone else was doing, or the school?
I did. And actually that's a nice little, segue into kind of what I did career-wise, because really what I was trying to do is, perfectly understandable, we all do it. I was, trying to please my parents, that I was still really young, still really a kid turning into a young man. So, I was really desperate to make my parents proud, please them. They desperately wanted me to go to university. The baby boomers, they, I think, inherited a lot of that pressure from their parents. My grandparents, when they grew up, it was all about what their kids did. The communities were a lot sort of smaller. Everybody knew everybody on the street. And if your kid turned out to be a doctor, that was the holy grail. So it was all about, so there's this undertone, I think, of, you got to go to university. Now, my dad in particular was a man who I desperately wanted to emulate. Again, this is biology. I wanted to get his attachment. I wanted to make him proud, but also he's an incredible human being. And he'd actually chosen a path where he dropped out of school. So he really wanted me to go a way that, in his words, was not as difficult. So he left school at 16, and he was desperate for me to get an education, because in his mind, he went the hard route. And yet the route that he went, actually, he made a lot of success out of that route. And I'm really sort of, in many respects, a sort of carbon copy of him. So there was a bit of probably projection. He hadn't achieved what he wanted to maybe achieve at school, wanted therefore me to kind of achieve that. And I kind of, so naturally I felt that. So I went to university. I didn't go to any lectures. I smoked a shitload of weed. So, there you go. Where does that get you? But, I did get this further education. My university did give me a higher national diploma, or as my brother calls it, have no degree, HND. And, I think the university was just fulfilling a quota. These universities, they make money, they don't want people to fail. So, I tried my absolute hardest, but shout out to Sheffield Hallam University for giving me a qualification that really I just did not deserve. But that kind of then allowed me to sort of finally get out of this further education business. And
was that a tick in the box at that point? Do you feel that your parents were saying that, you know, maybe go down the university route? Do you feel like that was a check in the box in their eyes? Or?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, totally. In fact, I kind of had the option to do a third year to turn it into a degree, and I sort of embarked on that. But then very, very quickly, about 3 months in, decided, I can't do this. So I withdrew, came home, and then did what I kind of had felt sort of a yearning to do, which was to work, to graft. So I had been instilled from a fairly early age the importance of grafting, the importance of working for your money. You know, when I wanted a car and my friends were driving these shiny brand new cars, when I had that conversation with my dad, he said, good, brilliant, I'm glad you want a car. You can go and stand in some manholes for me for 8 hours a day in your summer holidays, my dad being in the sort of plumbing business, in the sewerage business. So I kind of knew, I've been taught the value of money. I've been taught what a day's work feels like. So I was really kind of desperate to enter the working world. And I kind of knew I had something to offer there more than in the academic space. So,
do you think during education you just didn't really understand what it meant? You know, as in, what is this actually going to help me do? You know, just a disconnection from it. Whereas obviously working, you're like, well, I get this because I'm.
Yeah, totally. You know, what did I learn at university? Stuff about the House of Lords. Like, why do I need to know about the House of Lords? Like, what the hell is this? Like, I mean, if people had, you know, there were some interesting things, you know, how to break even and all this kind of stuff, but maybe I would have been better off sort of, you know, studying economics, but, you know, I didn't have the UCAS points, I didn't have the grades. So anyway, you know, it is what it is. But when I entered the working world, I kind of understood a bit more about what that entailed, and that was about go-getting, sort of expressing yourself, your sort of talents, you know, letting your determination kind of come through. And by that point, I think I had quite a lot of, you know, determination, bit of a point to prove. So I naturally went to a sort of graduation, a recruiter which specialised in graduates, and they chucked a load of us in a room and basically watched how we all observed how we all interacted with one another. And then after that, they approached me and said, you know, we're not sure if you're aware of this, but you're a salesman. And then it was, you know, you're a marketing person, you're this. And they basically, you know, quite a clever way of sort of, I guess, just seeing how people behave in these environments with other people. I don't know what I was doing. I was probably talking to a lot of people, being quite sort of effervescent and quite extrovert. So I then was told, okay, you're working in sales. And I'd spent then a long period grafting away, doing sales.
Did you feel that was a good fit at the time, or were you, well, let's go with it, or, you know?
Yeah, I did feel like it was a good fit. I very quickly realised that, you know, really sales is about, you know, getting people to sort of like you, is about, you know, chasing money, which I kind of, you know, had enjoyed. And, you know, it was also quite fast paced and quite, you know, you could kind of make as much money as you kind of wanted to, you know, providing you were prepared to sort of work for it. So, you know, I don't actually think now in hindsight that was necessarily the best thing for my brain, because my brain, you know, with this undiagnosed ADD wanted to, wanted dopamine. It wanted to chase stuff. It wanted this, you know, dopamine being a reward chemical. So every time I closed the deal or get close to closing a deal, you know, it gave me this thing that sort of I needed and kind of craved. And so I really sort of fixated on it. And, you know, once I got into an environment where, you know, which happened, you know, after, I don't know how many years, like 4 or 5 years, I got into a position where I could, be part of a startup business with some other people. So, and I had shares in this business, and it was kind of partly my own. And there's all this talk of, dividends and selling, and, my eyes like lit up, and it was, this is what my dad had done. He'd grown a plumbing business. He'd sold it. Wow. Like, I'm on my way. This is what I've always wanted. But, it really then became all consuming. We were selling to people all over the world, Latin America, the East.
What were you selling?
We were selling conference sponsorship. So we were an organizer of events for bankers to come together to network, and we basically hired the hotel. We got the people there through writing a program of speakers and panels, and invited people, and then used that as kind of the bait, if you like, to then get big banks to part with sums of money which were not insignificant, to sponsor these conferences. So we had clients in Dubai, we had clients in Latin America. So it kind of meant that, these were the days of the BlackBerry. What an awful invention that was. But, these were in the days where, you could, everything was done over email, and, ostensibly you could work from 3 a.m. to 10 at night, which I kind of, did a lot of the time, because, these were opportunities to make money, and that's what I was focused on, having no idea about stress and my health and mental health and all these kind of things. So that was the path that I kind of chose, and that was, the reasons why I was on that path, until some of those reasons started to become a little bit shaky. And a big turning point was in 2017. So I'd been with this business for 8 years, growing it, hoping that we would sell it. We hadn't sold it. We had a plan, 3-5 years, we'll sell it. Reality with these things, that doesn't happen. And so I'm still doing this thing. And then in 2017, my appetite for cocaine at the weekends became so much that I did one of the bravest things that I've ever had to do, which was call up a helpline for Cocaine Anonymous, and surrender to this thing and say, I've got this issue, I can't stop taking cocaine at the weekends, and I need help. So I entered into meetings. I worked a 12-step program. I make it sound really straightforward. It kind of wasn't. But.
Well, and just to take a step back on that, I mean, because obviously it's not a slow progress with these things, is it? It's kind of all of a sudden you don't just have a coke habit, So what would you say? Like, for example, during those 7 years with that business, where was it that you felt the drugs started to ramp up, where it sort of brought you to that point where you're like, hold on a second. I've got to sort of check this. Yeah.
I mean, it definitely kind of creeps, up on you, creeps into your life. I mean, I was, as I alluded to, university, I, liked smoking a lot of weed. I think because of this diagnosed sort of ADD, I was looking for things to sort of anesthetize myself a little bit, and to maybe quiet my mind. So I was using cocaine kind of to do that at the weekends. If you imagine, if you're, working, pretty hard and sort of long hours and constantly fixated with this BlackBerry and emails, and, that sort of, that can be a buzz, but it can also, take quite a lot out of you if you don't, give bandwidth to other things, just, sitting quietly,
you mentioned the dopamine hit, getting a sale over the line. Do you think it was kind of filling the void for that feeling when you're getting the sales in?
I think probably I think that I just wanted more of those highs. I think it wasn't so much a chasing of that high. I think it was I want more highs. I want more out of life. I want to create these, buzz moments. But I also think, I was a, what I would describe as a weekend warrior. So, although, on the odd occasion, if I had enough beers, then I'd have a Tuesday or Wednesday session, which were the worst. But I think at the weekend, I really wanted to kind of disassociate with work. I wanted to switch off, but I found it extremely, extremely difficult, when you're consumed by it so much. So I knew one of the ways that I could do that was just oblivion. So, right, let's get to oblivion, where, I'm not thinking about that stuff. And with enough, mind altering substances, you can do that. But yeah, just to go back, I guess, to your question, Adam. Yeah, I think probably there are a few elements. I think I started to find the job less satisfying, less fulfilling. I think also at the time, I had a relationship which was sort of starting to become a little bit difficult, or, and that was my part as much as anyone's. So I think these elements really, conspired to sort of create this kind of like perfect storm where, it just ramped up. And, I was earning really good money, so I had the means. So...
And do you think a lot of it was pressure based? Was it a way of kind of escaping, or sort of, numbing anything? Or because also, there's one side to drugs, which is just partying, right? Which I would say a good amount of people have had an experiment on a Saturday night in a club, for example. But it's kind of when it then tips over to it being that regular, frequent, that's just what we do type thing. Like I've spoken to you, like I like a beer. Again, I have to keep it in check because it can very easily get too much. And I've sort of tried to reflect, and I think a lot of it is through historic work stress. You get into habits. So do you think can you see any patterns that emerged?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the main pattern was introduce alcohol into my system. Alcohol is a sedative, it's a depressant. It's also a non-inhibitor, but, actually I never really enjoyed being like drunk. So, but it's readily available when 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock or whatever time you're finishing on a Friday comes, you go to the pub. That's our culture. That's our society, especially in London. So, so there I am in the pub, you'd have a few beers, and I started to feel that sort of like, I'm sort of slurring my words. I'm not quite as articulate or on point as I want to be. I'm feeling a bit tired. Right, I know what it's time for. So I'd call it on then. So that's kind of how it would progress. And I think it was so I could kind of be more kind of confident, because I think I was starting to sort of feel not very good about myself. It sort of would also, sort of numb, I guess, or disassociate myself with work, so that I could kind of switch off and kind of escape from that. Yeah, so I think it was like, those kind of elements, those kind of factors, and it was pretty bad before I had to call the helpline. There were many weekends where I'd be staring at myself in the mirror. I remember a particular dark moment where I was sort of having a conversation with myself in the mirror, but I was kind of having a conversation like with like the universe, or I was sort of, suddenly really afraid that, I was going to basically have a heart attack. And I remember sort of talking to my reflection and saying, or talking to, the universe or God or whatever, and sort of saying, don't take me now. And if you don't, I'll sort this out. I'll rectify this. That was a particularly
it sounds as well like there's an element of guilt attached to what you were doing, as in you didn't like what you were doing as well.
Yeah, and this is the cycle. So, you feel the guilt and the shame, which then feeds into this lack of self-worth. That happens usually around Tuesday, Wednesday. you sort of like rebuild yourself. You have a healthy kale salad and a nice smoothie, and then you're all chipper again. And then Friday comes around. Oh, what's that? It's 5 o'clock, and the cycle just like continues.
I know which meme you're thinking.
Oh
about.
yeah, you know what I'm thinking of.
Yeah. The question
Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yeah. I was going to ask you. So at the point where you thought, hang on a minute, this is not right. I think I've got an issue. How much time elapsed between that and then you actually picking up the phone? Because that must have been quite a challenge to push yourself to do.
Yeah, I think actually the moment, and this is quite interesting, was I was putting my girlfriend at the time through so much hell, and I knew that she was going to leave me. I was like, I'm on borrowed time. If I keep doing this, I'm out. Like, I'm gone. And so that was actually the catalyst for me calling so I couldn't do it for myself, but I sort of could do it in order to, because I think I knew if that happened, then I might just, descend and slide into just a far, far worse place. Because, my direction was, and it's back to sort of, emulating my father. I wanted to marry this woman. What I wanted to do is get married. I wanted to tick that box. So much so that I'd actually ignored, some red flags, which came back to sort of haunt me. And I'm sure she ignored a few red flags with me as well. I'm by no means perfect, but so that was quite interesting how I was working towards this thing, and it was actually really damaging me. It was like, causing me to make really bad decisions, putting me in this position where I was kind of quite unhappy, didn't feel good about myself, and then enter cocaine and alcohol, they just feed off of that shit. So I think that was the moment. It was just weekend after weekend. I'd signed up to do an Edinburgh Marathon. I'd done various things, and none of them could stop me from, I'd have one beer, and it would just be on. What I've since realised is, there is obviously a dependency. People can, get dependent on cocaine. I met a lot of people in recovery, some of whom were daily users. This is like they need it on a daily basis. But I've also since learned that there's this peculiar thing which not a lot of people talk about, which is when you mix alcohol and cocaine together, you can develop a dependency on that mixture, the fusion of those two sort of chemicals reacting in your brain. I'm not a scientist, so I don't know how to explain that, but for me that was definitely, I never did cocaine dry, which is sort of expression in recovery, i.e. I always had at least one or two drinks. So I think I was kind of addicted to that. It was that mix. So the solution for me at that time was 100% abstinence.
Just a quick question as well, because is there an example where you could give? It was actually because when you mentioned the marathon, it reminded me of a story, and I've forgotten if it's true or not. But if I remember correctly, I remember you went on a bender and then ran a marathon after 2 hours sleep. It
was my brother's 30th, and it was St Albans.
Which is pretty hilly, isn't it?
Yeah, and by the way, I did it in 1 hour 34.
It's ridiculous.
But that was my brother's 30th. I was drinking Irish cream at about 5 a.m, slamming these Irish creams, and then slept for about 3 hours, woke up, drove, and then did St Albans half marathon. I do have a lot of muscle memory from when I was a teenager running for the county and running long distances. So, it wasn't like some freak superhuman activity. It was like, I'd had a lot of conditioning and training, which I somehow still to this day can sort of cling on to. Yeah. It's just muscle memory. But, I was a highly functioning.
Well, and I guess my sort of point is that's almost like a bit of a good example of where habits sort of creep in too much, where you know actually you've got a big event but you've normalized it so much, you're like, screw it, I'm just going to go, I can do both.
Yeah, and actually that's a curious thing as well, where you know if I had something important the next day, the idea of going out the night before was so naughty that, you know, again, you know, I think a lot of this comes down to brain chemistry. The idea of like going and doing this fucking thing anyway and sort of getting away with it, you know, that would release a sort of reward chemical in itself and would be really exciting to me. So there was lots of things that I did, you know, some relationships, really important relationships that I very nearly really, you know, ruined, you know, and I'm talking about, you know, the people that brought me into this world, you know, big occasions that, you know, I wasn't present for. And, you know, through the 12 steps, I kind of had to meet those things head on with these people and sort of apologize and do a lot of cleaning out house, you know, which we can talk about a little bit.
Well, and I think it probably is a good segue to go on to 12 step, because obviously, you know, I've listened to a lot of other people talk about it, and actually it has mixed I don't know, feedback or perception, because obviously there's quite a lot of spirituality in it. But actually what I hear is...
Don't mention the S word.
Yeah, well, and that's not me judging it for that reason, but as in I'm saying, there's a lot of... well, I suppose what I'm interested in is, so you made the phone call, how did you then get... What then took you to sort of 12-step and AA?
So I made the phone call. The phone call lasted about 2 minutes. I remember the name of the lady that I spoke to, Trina. You know, and she, you know, I was ready to tell her my, you know, life story. Hi, Trina. Poor me. You know, I've got this cocaine addiction. Do you want to hear about how it started? And of course, you know, she didn't. She was a volunteer, as I know now, and she just said to me, "Okay, you need to get to a meeting." And that was it. And that's all that she really needed to say. So did I get to a meeting that night? Of course I fucking didn't. Did I go to a meeting the next day? No, I didn't. I was terrified of going to this meeting. So, you know, I'm in communication with my girlfriend. She's like, you know, so you go and ask these people for help and they tell you to do one simple thing and you don't do it. Like, what are you doing, man? And I was kind of like, yeah, what am I doing? So with this relationship kind of on the line, I then went to a meeting. It was like the last meeting that I could have gone to that day. I was putting it off. It was at like 9:30 or something in Archway. Don't know if you spent any time in Archway, but you know, it's pretty colourful. And anyway, so I went to this meeting, and you know, met some people who were really kind to me, kind of took me in, and then I heard, you know, their stories, and I'd heard about how mangled they were and where they were now. But they just had this, you know, there's this thing that they talk about in 12 Steps, which is it's about attraction, not promotion. It's why it's kind of underground. You know, it either attracts you to it or it doesn't. And, you know, the first way you get attracted to it is if you goddamn need help. And then the next way that you actually start the actual put into action and actually go through the process of actually doing the thing that you kind of need to do, you know, you need to have examples of people that have something that you want. And namely, it's, you know, sobriety, but also having a sense of just well-being, self-confidence, chill, you know, not giving a fuck, whatever. Lots of these things really sort of resonated with me. So I kind of, you know, I was ready to sort of jump in. You know, I was kind of, although it was petrifying and it was terrifying, you know, I did make that step. You know, I got a sponsor, and I went through the 12 steps. So that was, like August 2017. And yeah, you know, it does have, even I now today have mixed sort of opinions about it. But one thing that I do have strongly is my opinion that, you know, I'm eternally grateful to that fucking process. Yeah. And, you know, anybody who struggles and is, you know, has a dependency, without that, it's quite hopeless. I don't see rehabs necessarily working that well. That's my experience, in terms of my lived experience, in terms of people that I've encountered who've gone through that process. The 12-step process, it works, but it is something that, does have a sort of spiritual element, and I think that puts a lot of people off. But I think that's because they sort of understand this. They don't understand, spirituality, forms of spirituality. I think it's very personal to the individual. But you go into meetings, you hear a lot of people referring to God, and that really puts people off. But God is a synonym for whatever the fuck you want it to be. The universe, whatever energy is like currently, running through us now. Nature, whatever it might be. Yeah. Which is why an important thing is sort of finding your own your own sort of sense of what that is.
And so you touched on one of the outcomes of 12-step was to go and have conversations with people that you may have wronged. What was that about? What was that aiming to do?
Yeah. So so I think one of the sort of themes that I mentioned I wanted to kind of like bring in was this kind of sense of balance. So I think I've sort of talked a bit about how the scales were kind of really, shifting in certain directions. In terms of how I was as a human being, as a sort of, receptacle of, thoughts, feelings, what I didn't realize is that, through your life, if there are things that happen, if you wrong people, it's the classic thing of, we've all been there where you wake up the next day and you've had a few drinks, and you have that moment where you're like, what did I say? And like, who did I say it to? Did I offend that person by saying that? So, but if you sort of blow that up a little bit in terms of, if you do certain things that have wronged people, and you've never sort of met that head on, you've never really sort of resolved that, without you knowing, you sort of carry that around with you. So the idea of that is to really go through that, and to relieve you of a lot of that stuff, so that as they talk about, you can walk around wherever, and you never have to be sort of like looking over your shoulder. Who am I going to come across? Are they going to be cross with me? Am I going to be cross with them? So it's kind of just getting rid of some of this like, baggage that, you might be, carrying around with you, and might be the thing that the drugs and the alcohol are kind of feeding off. So it's really a cathartic process. It's quite a horrendous, it's quite a nerve-wracking process.
Yeah, I guess it's forcing you to take head-on issues. I can understand why they would encourage you to do it.
Yeah. And, it's also quite a humbling experience. You get kind of, it's kind of coached by people who've gone through it before. You have this wonderful thing called the Big Book about, Alcoholics Anonymous, which even if you have a drug addiction, that's the book that everybody refers back to, and it's written out in there, how to conduct yourself. And one of the things that you have to do is just listen to that person. I did this. How did that make you feel? And let them, tell you. Hear it, like really hear it. Let them vent if that's what they need to do. That's cathartic for the person. It's also cathartic for you. It's also very humbling. And you might just find at the end of that process, it's not guaranteed, but you might just find at the end of that process that the two of you then are able to see each other in the eyes and almost get to a place of sort of peace, acceptance, maybe even love, or some softness, some kind of something resembling a little bit more kindness rather than, hatred and resentment. Resentment is the word that they use. So clearing these resentments. I myself had a previous relationship which had ended really badly. I'd done some awful things during a period in her life, which was there was stuff going on. Members of her family were dying, was seriously unwell. I was basically a major see you next Tuesday. So I met this person, went through that process, and how that process was concluded is the individual that I'd come to try and make peace with, which I just didn't see how that would be possible, ended up concluding our conversation by saying, Bruce, thank you so much. It was really good to see you. I think it's time now for you to go and be happy. That was well wishing to me.
So she had an understanding.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's amazing. So she had an understanding that, she knew it sort of wasn't you. It was, it was like your behaviour, but it wasn't really you. And it was a consequence of what was happening at the time.
Yeah, and I think this is the big thing, and this is the spiritual element of the 12 steps, is it shines a lot of light on you, in inverted commas, but what it really shines a light on is your ego. So it is you, but it's part of basically how you're allowing your mind and also, more importantly, your fear to drive these behaviors that would drive anybody to have these behaviors, and actually are not necessarily in your, are not natural in terms of, I think that we all want to be kind and loving, but every now and again our minds or an element of fear drives us to do things which are wrong, horrible. So it kind of shines a light on that and teaches you to sort of observe that stuff, and how that actually drives a lot of these behaviors. And so you talk to people about that, you own it. And how can you still be, mad at somebody who is saying, look, I'm really sorry, and I'll do whatever it takes to sort of, if there's anything I can do, I'll do it. And then to sort of sit down with them and talk about what they're doing, what happened to them. Okay, they got a drug addiction, and now they're going through this massive process, which is like an overhaul, and they're really humbling themselves and, learning a lot about themselves and fear and all these kind of things. I don't see how you can necessarily, but I'm sure there are examples, because people do some pretty monstrous things. But you get what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, we're not talking here that you had to face it's not like you caused anyone any harm, like physical harm, or but you were asking for forgiveness of, in theory, relatively minor things. But like I said, I think anybody would find it difficult if someone sat in front of you and said, look, I wronged you, I'm really sorry.
I guess it's encouraging you to look at the friction points you've had with a different lens, without the clouding of all the substances and stuff, and freeing up headspace and baggage, really, so you can focus more energy on the recovery, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And it's really nice to see that person then go off.
Yeah.
We haven't kept in touch since then. It's not necessary. She's married, she's got, a family. That was the moment where that was the closure. Okay, yeah. You go off into the universe on your path, I'm going to go off. But both of our paths are going to be improved by the fact that we've just allowed that stuff just to fuck off into the ether. Yeah. Right, fuck off. That happened. We both were probably carrying it, but now we can just sort of shrug the shoulder and just, be clear of it. And yeah, I think so. That really, I came out of that situation, and it wasn't like, oh, well done me, because I knew that's the last thing that I should be doing. Yeah. And also, it wasn't anything to do with fucking me. It was me following this process that, from this book, which had been written by these two, guys who actually I've since learned were potentially taking quite a lot of psilocybin, but that's another conversation. But there was this text is sort of, I've heard people refer to it as, divine text. This is why it spooks people, right? It's like, okay, I'm out. I'll just get back to smoking the crack. It's like, no, sit down. Wait. He doesn't mean it like it's a Bible, but like, it's just really good stuff. But so it wasn't me. It was kind of, I just followed this process, and wow, like that, I feel really good. About what I've just done, about that person, about how free we are. So, I think, so there's two things I think at this point. Yeah, now I'm free of that, declouded. I think that's a great way of, sort of expressing it. So, with that kind of mist and veil removed, so I start to bring things sort of back into balance, where really I'm starting to become more like my, authentic self. So I think that's kind of what I was referring to about, nobody necessarily wants to be a, cunt. I think everybody's true, authentic, being is, one of, kindness and love. But
I think just quickly, I think for me though, what's really important about that message is people shouldn't chastise themselves for mistakes, because
that's human nature. Everyone makes mistakes.
Exactly, and in a sense, I think we sort of live in a bit of a culture and a society where you're not allowed to make mistakes. And I think that's, for me, that's a really good lesson, which is you can do some, like you said, fairly horrendous things to someone, but you can learn and you can grow. And if that's a message from that part of your process, it's a pretty freaking healthy one.
Yeah, totally. But I think, a lot of people, they're not necessarily, they don't necessarily do the work that is involved to see potentially what it is that's underneath, these errors, these mistakes.
Because it's painful to self-reflect.
It's painful to because it's, if you don't have a tool by which you can really examine it in a sort of more healthy way, what is it? It's wallowing, isn't it? It's like, I don't want to, you kind of need a teacher, a guide, a book, something to, I encourage anybody, to do work on themselves, get therapy or explore Buddhist teachings or, whatever it might be, go and listen to some, self-help podcasts from people who have kind of trodden that path and kind of understand a little bit what it's about. Because in the 12 steps, when you do make a mistake, you have this process, it's kind of like journaling, where you look at something that's happened in the day and you sit down and you might have sort of a resentment, like you've said something because you've been pissed off with that person, or they said something to you and you reacted. And then at the end of the day, you sit down and you look at what was going on with me. So let's take, like, how can you possibly know what's going on with that person? You can't. You're not in that person's head. You haven't lived that person's life. But what you can do is you can assess what maybe was going on in that point at that time for yourself, and you write down in categories, what was going on. How was I selfish? I wanted that person to be a certain way. That's fucking ludicrous. Like, how, what are you, like, the control of the universe? Yeah. Or I was scared at that point that I wasn't enough. That person talked down to me. So I then reacted. And it gives you, through that process, it kind of allows you to kind of step back and observe yourself in these situations where, okay, I'm about to respond and react because I feel this thing coming up. And that fear is, that thing is usually fear. Another great expression that I like from the book of Alcoholics Anonymous is fear is the firing mechanism for all sin. So you think about that. Let's take envy. I don't believe, I'm scared I'm not enough. I'm scared that guy over there is more handsome who's mowing my wife's lawn. Like, I'm now envious of that that guy. greed, again, I don't have enough money. My status isn't enough, whatever it might be. So you can see how, but so, through doing a process like that and becoming, that's what self-awareness is. That's what true self-awareness is. And I do it all the time. I catch myself. It sometimes takes a little time for that behavior to sort of come out, and then you kind of go, whoa, and then you reflect on it, and it allows you to have much more of an honest conversation with yourself, but also others. Hey, I was an arsehole, and I think the reason why I was an arsehole is because I was fucking terrified. Like, I was terrified of not being enough, or I wanted you to be really pleased with me, or I wanted this thing, whatever it might be, this outcome, so it's kind of just learning really to sort of let go. And I think that's where the sort of spirituality comes in, is like, okay, I'm not the director. I'm not God. I don't have any control over the universe, over what goes on. And yet somehow we can fall into this trap of believing that somehow we do. Like, this person needs to give me a reaction or give me an outcome exactly what I need. It's delusional. So yeah, once all that stuff gets declouded, I'm now in this situation where I'm like, oh, okay. So I'm sort of much more aware of my feelings, my fears, and I'm in this job and I'm doing this thing, driving towards these goals, which suddenly are just not cutting it. They're just not going to cut it with this now new headspace that I've got, and this clarity around
the new life goals. You mean, or your previous life goals?
Yeah, what I'm doing, because I'm still living this life, right? So yeah, 2017 I get sober. I do about a year of sobriety, and I realized that one of the reasons why I've sort of gone to oblivion is I'm in this job that sort of, I just don't want to be doing anymore, and it's not fulfilling for me. It's causing me quite a lot of stress, and so I kind of decide, right, I need to remove myself from that. So I go and see a career coach and talk to them about, and we still don't come up with what I want to go into. I'm now, of all things, in the sort of fitness and wellness space, which is kind of unbelievable. But so I do this process. I don't discover what it is that I want to do next in my career, even though you'd think that would be the brief for a career coach. But they do some great exercises with me. I get some clarity around sort of the fact that I definitely need to leave. So if I don't know what I want to go into, what I do know is I need to stop doing this thing. So I resign. They allow me to stay on in a sort of freelance capacity a little bit, and I kind of work when I want, and that's kind of nice. I go traveling for a bit, and I'm, to South America, where, cocaine addicts, you'd probably recommend a cocaine addict doesn't go. But, that's where I went, and I did 6 months backpacking around South America, sober. And by the way, in Medellin, in Colombia, the taxi drivers will drive up to you on the street waving a bag of cocaine out the window at you. That's how kind of like lawless it is. But I did it, and I was working, this sort of program. I was meditating in these like amazing hills. Makes me sound a bit like a monk. I definitely wasn't. And I was doing that, and my life was kind of coming really back into balance. I suddenly was like doing these things, like just being out in nature, and I was like, why is this so goddamn fucking enjoyable? There's no plates of lines in front of me. There's no fridge within 2 miles, let alone in the room next door with beers in. Like, how can I just be enjoying this so much? And I think, it was because I suddenly realized I'm really going back to, the roots of what it is to be, human. And I'm just not sure that we're supposed to necessarily be in buildings and cramped on top of each other and all this kind of thing. I just think it kind of it can lead to stress. And I think for me, stress was a big component, was a big factor in terms of so the resentments, carrying stuff around, a job that I didn't like, doing cocaine all the time, relationship that was turning toxic. All these things are stressful. So I sort of took one by one of those things away, and just really went back, stripped back to sort of basics really, and found there were things that I could include into my life that suddenly it was like this, this is kind of the way, this is the way I want to live my life.
It sounds like you're making different decisions than you would have done before you went through that process, even though you had availability of stuff from the taxi drivers and things like that. Am I right in thinking, you mentioned earlier on as part of the 12-step process, you had to identify someone that you looked up to that had something that you wanted, or sobriety, whatever that was. Am I right in thinking that as part of that process, you start to make decisions based on how they might make them rather than yourself, so that then becomes habitual, or is that not part of the process?
I think I would look up to people. I had a sponsor, so I saw sort of guidance from him. But the good thing about the program is it goes back to what does it say in the book, which does paint this picture of it sort of being a bit of a cult, and this is what sort of organized religion is, right? What does the text say? Right. But the text really was, there were just tools in it. It was really that's the way I saw it, and I think that's the way a lot of people who did this stuff saw it. This is a toolkit, so go back to the toolkit, which was nice because it was never like, my sponsor's name was Jack. Obviously, I won't reveal his surname, and shout out Jack, motherfucker, saved my fucking life, potentially. But he, if I went to him, he never said, oh, I've done it this way, and my opinion is you should do it this way. And you shouldn't listen to Gary, because Gary will tell you to do it that way, but he's a fucking crackhead, so don't listen to that. He was like, okay, have you thought about doing some writing about that? No, I probably should. It would get to the point where it was annoying. It was no, give me the miracle cure, give me the thing, give me the little hack. It was no, go and sit in front of a page and see what fucking comes up. You've got the most annoying thing was, have you sat in meditation about this? It's no, of course I'm having relationship problems, fucking help me. It's well, go and maybe the answer will come. You'd sit in meditation, sounds really hoodoo voodoo. You'd sit in meditation, and I was practicing meditation, so it wasn't I just went and meditated. I was practicing meditation. It would just come. It would just, this fantastic thing called intuition. Where does that come from? It's just when you strip everything away and you just close your eyes and take out any external stimuli, you are going to get to a place with practice where you just kind of,
When you were in South America, for example, when you started to make these changes, you made the decision to not, left the job, for example. Was there a period of adjustment? As in, did you get to a point where you almost had to say, I give myself permission to live like this and to do this? The reason I say that, so for example, when I left my job to start my own company, it took me a long time for the habits that I'd got into that was causing stress to leave. Even now, I'm checking my watch because I'm oh, maybe I've got an email that I need to, do you know what I mean? So it's it's did it take you a while to reach sort of that, to let yourself do it?
Yeah, it did. I think I went to a career coach because I thought I have to have something that I go straight into next. And I think that's a learned thing from my parents, who were terrified of me our parents, the old generations, they're a bit old school. CVs are so important to them. I don't think anyone fucking uses CVs anymore. But, back then people did, and a gap in your CV, employers would ask about that. Why weren't you employed for this amount of time? And if you, maybe back then, if you gave the answer of, I was meditating in a mountain in Colombia, I was trying to figure out my life. Like, they'd be like, sounds like you was like, on your gap year and just wasting time. Like, get out of my office. Now I think there's a little bit more, perhaps, awareness around sort of stuff like that. But, I'd learnt that. And so I was terrified of having this gap on my CV. So, which is why I went to see a career coach. And then it just became very clear that this is not going to come. And I actually spoke to the chairman of my company, and he said, Bruce, sometimes these decisions can take 4 seasons. It can take a whole year for it just. So I was like, all right, so he's giving me permission. He's sort of suggesting I just sort of DOS for a year. That sounds pretty good. But I was terrified, idle hands make, work for the devil, right?
Yeah.
I'm coming out of this drug addiction, I've got money, and if I come out of the company because I own part of the company, I'm going to get even more money. This is a potentially dangerous situation. So I didn't take it lightly, but it wasn't coming. It wasn't coming. So I was like, well, I think I'm going to be okay. I think actually I'm going to be worse if I stay and keep pretending that I'm invested in this job and I'm not. And, and because you're doing the program, you're like, what is this? How am I letting other people down? Which would have never crossed my mind before. It would have all been about me. I've got to make sure I get as much money out of this situation as possible. But I was suddenly sort of being taught to think much more about other people and not make these decisions so much about me. And I was like, there are people working in this environment and I'm just not at the races. This is unfair. Like, I'm sucking the life out of this place. So I decided I was just gonna, I just need to just leave. So I'm not even sure if I spoke to my parents before making the decision. But anyway, I think I did actually. So I just left without anything necessarily to go to. But I think it was less about giving myself permission, and it was more about reorientating sort of my goals. Like, if I leave this company, maybe I'm not going to emulate my dad, sell a company and have this, achieve this like success in inverted commas. So,
well, really what you were fighting was the standard narrative.
Hell yeah. And if you, I think I'm very grateful for doing the 12 steps, because it did shake me up, and it did introduce me to sort of spirituality, which then kind of shines a light on the fact that, there are these external things and there are these things that we convince ourselves that we want and we need. But when you start to sort of chase something else, which is like this like completeness or sense of being just content or at peace, you're like, the latest iPad's not gonna fucking do that. Like, or you actually start to see how these things, introducing these things, are actually potentially gonna like fuel your ego and create more of a monster, which you're actually trying no longer feed. I was feeding this beast cocaine and booze and money and travel and women and like fast-paced sort of life or job.
I remember being with you when you bought a 400 quid blazer once, and a 50 quid pocket square.
I think the blazer was like 500 quid a pocket square,
but
90 quid. And we were bunking off work that day. I was supposed to be at work that day.
But I remember thinking, like, shit, Bruce must be doing well. Like, here's me and my, like, I'm not buying blue blazers and pocket
I've still got that
handkerchiefs?
blue blazer, by the way.
I should hope so.
A lot of that stuff I've given to charity shops. Now I got an email the other day from a charity shop because I registered for Gift Aid, and they said, "Thank you for your donations. We made £550." I nearly stormed down there and said, "Well, you can no, that's my money actually, and also give me anything that you haven't sold back, because actually that's worth a lot more than I realised." But I mean, a lot of that stuff, I was buying, I had loads of addictions that I didn't realize, loads of these things. Sex for a while, definitely shopping. I went to New York once on business, and I walked into Ted Baker of London. Bearing in mind I live in London, and I spent something like $2,500. Like, I couldn't carry any more clothes out of the shop.
That's such a big representation, isn't it, of you trying to validate the shit you were doing that you didn't enjoy. And
yeah, it was just it was pure dopamine. I remember feeling so good about buying all this stuff, and then you walk down the street 50 yards and it leaves you.
Gone, yeah.
And then you're like, you look down at these bags and you're like, how am I going to pay for this?
Yeah.
Like, or how am I going to then, my cash flow is going to take a big hit from today's, hour of activities.
And so you finish 12-step, you go into the belly of the beast in South America, somehow don't get into cocaine, but what activities or what sort of things did you start to do, on this kind of theme of balance and authenticity? What did you start, what started changing in terms of your daily habits, your activities? What did you stop? Well, I guess we've touched on what you stopped doing, as in shopping, drugs, booze, work, or stressful work. But what did you replace it with?
I never stopped shopping, by the way. I didn't say that. I started becoming obsessed with really random Latin American football team shirts. But anyway, it's definitely. I doubt that's going to kill me. I started to, when you're living sober, conversations with people become a lot more important, and what you can share with them, and how that then, especially if you're sober, what that then opens up in terms of a dialogue, in terms of a conversation, is just, you just get to a lot more of a deeper sort of level than you would do with, booze, right? We've sort of all, been there where we've had those vacuous conversations over some shots at the bar. Is that what we're talking about here? But, when you obviously just sort of, spending time in cafes or having lunch or going on these sort of like tours or hiking. Like, I spent a lot of time talking to, guides on these like hikes, and meeting people in Latin America. And I got a lot from that because in Latin America, a lot of people are not as wealthy as we are here in the West. And so what their reasons for living are very different. Family is like the number one, La Familia is, the most important thing. And boy, do they fucking, populate, boy, do they breed. But, you sit down and you talk to people and they talk to you about that, and they talk about how hard they work and how important it is to, provide and try and teach their, kids certain things. But it's sort of very geared differently to, my experience here in the West. It's not so much about, you've got to succeed and you've got to do this, got to do that. It's much more actually enshrined in sort of, the Catholicism of like, being kind, being there for your grandma, making sure you spend time with your grandma, just little things like that, which, because their lives are a lot more simple. I think it was, I was meant to sort of spend time there during that period when I was sober and really reflecting on life. And kind of when I came back, I was kind of, with all my wristband, all my fucking, artisanal wristbands, I was kind of really wanted to sort of simplify things, and I was quite jealous in a way of like, you know, these people and their existence, even though, you know, when you talk to them, you know, they're incredibly I'm not sure if envious is the right word, but they're very curious about, you know, what we do. And so you flew here on a plane. Wow, what's that like to go to another country? You know, they've never left their borders. So that was quite that was quite sort of humbling, and kind of, you know, I kind of came back and I was thinking, you know, right, how can I simplify my life? How can I sort of try and, I don't know, live in a better way? And I'm still kind of figuring that out. I don't have children. I did recently get married, but, you know, we've decided for our lives that we don't want to have children. So, you know, my nephews are very important. Spending time with them is very important. But it's also, for me, trying to sort of live a life which is a bit more simple and is not orientated towards, you know, money, status, you know, possessions, because all these things are they'll basically feed off each other, and they're sort of what's the word? You know, the more you have, the more you want, and potentially the sort of unhappier, you know, you are, and that's just my experience.
Consumerism trap, isn't it? I listened to a podcast the other day, and it was talking about how the first half of your life is ego driven, so, you know, consuming all that stuff and collecting as much as you can. And the second half of your life is all about the soul, and that average turning point is about 47.2. And I thought that was really fascinating.
Really?
Yeah. Really interesting. So you don't accumulate as much stuff. It's more about experiences and more soulful existence.
From 47 and a half.
47.2, I think, was the average age.
Right.
But I thought that was really interesting.
Wow.
My question to you, see, that trip you did in South America, was that your first travelling experience, and how impactful has it been for you? Because I backpacked around the world, and I lived in America for a year, and I've talked about this before. For me, it was one of the most seminal years of my life. And you talk about the gap on the CV, and I could spend all day talking about that gap on my CV. And if people perceive that to be, well, you're not conforming, then so be it. But I wouldn't change it for the world.
Yeah,
I'd encourage anyone else that's thinking about it to go and do it.
Yeah, definitely. I almost think it should be maybe like, I don't know, like law.
Yeah.
You know, like that people, you know, because I think also, you know, there are teachings and ways of living, you know, also in the East, right? You know, Buddhism, you know, things of that nature.
They're more inward focused rather than externally focused like we are in the West, aren't they?
Yeah. So, you know, I remember being in Thailand and wanting to tip a taxi guy on a moped. And he said, oh, no, I can't accept it. And I said, oh, no, please, like, come on, like, this is like literally like 10p to me, like, just pay. And he was like, no, because if you monetize my kindness, then it becomes like it's like, I've done that for money, and that's not what, so you're actually then taking away that. And it was like, holy shit, like, these guys have really got kindness, like, figured out. So, you know, it's just, I think stuff like that, I mean, you know, for young people to kind of see and learn from, but I kind of feel like young people are kind of getting that right now. I think they're sort of figuring stuff out a little bit, and waking up to things like that. And it probably is because, you know, they have access, you know, and can travel, and but yeah, I totally think that you know, I think it should be almost part of the education process. Like,
I agree, and I think there'd be fewer trolls in the world if people were booted out of the country at 18 to either go and do something for the military, or go to help people, or go and travel and spend a year away and come back, and just understanding other cultures. And I think when you get back, you appreciate your own country more, and, you know,
definitely,
other cultures. Like you say, that in Latin America they revere the elderly, they're more sense of family. I stayed with a family in Mexico City, and they've never met me before, but because I was a friend of the family, you can come in, we're having dinner, and so this is just amazing. We're very closed, aren't we, I think? And
very trusting and very open, and like, And
even the football matches, so you go to the football here, it's very generally, typically more male dominated. Over there, it's a lot more families, it's very family orientated, and and
everybody in the country's, you know, I've seen, I spent time in Peru and people walking their dogs and the dog's got like a Peru shirt on, you know, and their babies into it and their kids into it and their daughters and their aunts and their grandmas, you know, it's like, you know, because I think that sense of like, you know, pride and things. And I think it comes from their, you know, ancient sort of like cultures, their civilizations about, you know, community. It's sort of tribal in a way. And I think maybe we've sort of lost sight a little bit of that. And
well, I think there's a real arrogance in a way, or overconfidence of the way that we're living is completely correct. And, you know, I don't know if enough people are really questioning, or at least understanding and experiencing these other forms of sort of culture and community, you know, because I do think, whether we like to believe it or not, a lot of people are keeping up with the Joneses. They're part of the rat race. They're part of a story which they haven't really questioned. And unless you go and actually adapt and acclimatise to a different way of life, you know, how are you going to actually understand that? Like you said, there is, obviously with social media and the amount of content out there now, you know, people get exposed to it. But, you know, I haven't stayed with a family in South America. I'd love to, because it would be amazing to completely remove, you know, who cares what you're earning? Who cares what you're wearing? Who cares what you're good at, bad at, whatever? Being in an environment where it's like, well, you're just you. You know, I don't think enough of us get to do that.
What impact that has on happiness, because just because you're accumulating all the stuff, it doesn't guarantee any happiness at all. But if you're sitting with a family, chatting about their culture and understanding their values and breaking bread with them. Yeah.
I think if you lived with a family, Adam, we'd in Latin America, we'd never see you again. I'd have to start calling you Adam Halvanez. I mean...
Well, I think for me as well, what actually I meant as well in terms of what changed in your daily habits, you know, e.g. you're not doing these activities. You've touched on meditation, you've touched on yoga. You know, how did you start to find those things, and what did you start to get, like surfing, I think, as well? You know, how did you find these things, and what did they start to do for you?
So I found these things through having, you know, when you quit your job and you have, you know, a lot of time to sort of do stuff, you know, you have time to do stuff. You have time to go walking. You have time to take up new hobbies or what have you. I mean, the reason why I took up surfing was to impress the girl that I'm now married to, so that worked.
Well, that worked.
Yeah, but I kind of wanted to, I moved down to live by the sea. When was that? Like 2-3 years ago, and just found living on near the beach and kicking my shoes off and socks off and just being able to go and walk on the sand, feet in the water. You know, everybody knows that feeling. Everybody knows that sensation. Everyone knows that it's nice.
I think, just for the record as well, it's probably useful to know that where we're sat is the furthest point from any coast in Britain. So to a lot of people, being by the sea might be an everyday thing, but for us it's not.
Yeah. And, you know, I'm extremely lucky because, unfortunately, you know, there's a price for living, you know, by the sea. So, you know, I count myself very lucky. But, I guess I wanted to, pick up kind of like new ways of spending my time that would allow me to find, peace, really. I think I've sort of moved a lot away from this concept, this idea of like happiness, because I think it's a bit of a sort of dangerous thing to sort of chase. I think the real beauty is in just feeling content and just feeling at peace.
And being present.
Which comes with being, you know, present, you know, because if your mind is, going at 1 million miles an hour, i.e. you're not present, how peaceful is that? You know, it's not really.
I guess to sort of move along in a way is, obviously at the same time, the way that we live in the West. We've got to pay the bills. So where's your focus now? What are you know, so I guess you've gone through this journey. How are you now sort of manifesting that into conforming some way, but with that balance that you talk about?
Oh yeah, of course, yeah, exactly. I mean, you know, although I whinge and moan about, they're sort of like, you know, this is, you know, I still have a vehicle, and I still like clothes. I tend to buy now like B Corp certified yoga wear from California, which is not cheap. Like, you know, this stuff is not cheap. So, you know, yeah, I've got, you know, I've still got various vices and things, you know, that I'm sort of, you know, try and hold in balance. Yeah, so now, so during the career coaching thing, you know, they asked me to look back to when I was a kid, you know, what were you good at when you were a kid, and ask your parents. And so I did that, you know, and as I mentioned, you know, I was a runner, and I was, you know, doing lots of sports, but particularly running. And I also had these like aspirations. I did a bit of amateur acting, and I was kind of really wondering, like, I think I even said to my parents at one point, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to become a professional actor. And they literally said to me, Bruce, you've done some things which have really alarmed us over the years, but this is the worst. And I was like, what? So you don't think I could be Daniel Day-Lewis? Okay.
How old were you when you said that?
Like this is like 2-3 years ago. I was like 38, like a full-grown man who should really know better. But you know, I'm a bit of a dreamer, and I'm a bit of a go-getter. And there's an element of me that just doesn't give a fuck. So, you know, if I decide, which is, you know, a good thing, I think it's a healthy thing, but you do need it being sense checked. And I did get it sense checked. But the reason I bring that up is because I kind of wanted to do stuff that would use that talent, where I could be in front of people, I could sort of perform, and use, you know, some of what I felt was, a bit of a sort of talent. So fast forward, so I'm basically unemployed. I'm still living in London. I can still afford my fabulous gym membership, which is like a really nice gym in London. And I'm doing sales coaching at my old company. They've afforded me this brilliant opportunity to sort of coach some of the team. And by the way, I think it's important as well to acknowledge that one of the reasons why I became unhappy and sort of unfulfilled, what I realised is that I just stopped learning. I was doing this job that I could essentially do, not quite with my eyes closed, but you know, that is the expression that comes to mind. So I was doing sales coaching, so I was teaching people how to sell, which was a new skill in itself. How do you coach people? So I did loads of reading on it. I was like, wow, there's this psychology behind it, and coaching is about getting people to come up with the answer, not like dictating it to them. So how do you do that? Asking the right questions, getting them to figure it out for themselves. Because if you figure something out yourself, you've learnt it. Yeah. If I say to you, this is how you do something, you're going to go out of this room, you're going to go and do something else, and then in 10 minutes you're going to go, Bruce just said something really profound. I'm pretty sure he gave me the key to that thing, but I can't remember what he said. Whereas if your brain, you know, this is like neuroplasticity, isn't it? It's like it literally creates an area in your brain that goes, that's that in that archive. You've got that now. It's in storage. Yeah. So I was learning about that, and I was pounding the gym. I was spending a lot of time in the gym. I was sober, and I was just really into it. And the whole time I'm like, what should I do? What should I do? And I'm doing quite a lot of yoga as well. Yoga is helping me. We haven't talked about yoga, but we can if we've got time. And so I just get to a point where I'm like, fitness. Like, could I go into fitness? And I'm thinking, I've done a lot of cocaine, done quite a lot of drinking, done quite a lot of smoking. I don't know if I can go into fitness. That sounds like I'm an imposter. And then I thought, actually, it'd be quite good to have an imposter into an industry with like no people who've like done that kind of gnarly shit. And I'm wondering how many people who've done that gnarly shit might want help from someone who's lived that, has had that experience, and is now. And so I basically trained to be a PT. I trained to be a PT, and I also trained to be a yoga instructor. Both of those things, and the way I sort of would sum it up is that I just leant into it. I was like, okay, I'm doing this thing, just lean into it, and just see what comes out of it. And now I live in Brighton. I have clients, and I teach yoga at different sort of places, at different sort of like gyms. It's early days for me, but it gives me an opportunity to kind of help people, to try and help them grow, turn into better human beings, which is very important to me now. To use my experience, as gritty and sometimes horrible to look at as it is, to create something positive in terms of my legacy. It also means I don't have a BlackBerry, and I get to spend quite a lot of time with human beings and outside, and not so much with emails. I get to build little communities, whether they're classes or just, at a gym in terms of, the memberships. And that sort of feeds into, all these things that I've sort of, my little journey has basically taught me is kind of important, is the way for me, and is, something that I feel is a lot more balanced. But it's it's terrifying, of course. I have massive imposter syndrome, and I'm still getting to grips with this balance thing. I still like to go out, and I drink now, and that's another sort of conversation. But essentially, in 2020 during COVID, I guess you could call it a relapse, but I kind of didn't go off on the same crazy. Bruce the Monster didn't re-emerge. I actually, through the work I'd done, found that it wasn't having the same, effect on me in terms of this insatiable, addictive sort of appetite to just do more and more and more. Yeah, so life's pretty sweet. Yeah,
That's a huge journey, isn't it? From beginning all the way through, and the way you are now is fantastic to see. And it's interesting that you're more outwardly focused now. It's from your sales training other people, and the coaching piece to helping people. It's a lot more outwardly focused, isn't it, than it maybe had been previously? Yeah,
definitely. But I think I have to really watch that. I've been watching that like recently, where I've sort of observed that I'm like, I've got to look the perfect way. I've got to amass this amount of money, and my company's got to have this status. And then I'm like, whoa, like, Bruce, hang on a minute. What the fuck are you doing? Yeah. Like, this is like the shit that we're trying to move away from. So, I've got a therapist who I see weekly, and he's quite good to sort of soundboard stuff with. And I think one of the things that I want to do going forward is sort of talk to him about, or make a plan with him and with other people about how I can make sure what I'm doing is true to the things the tenets that I kind of set out that I wanted, that were important to me. So, not being consumed by it. So having time to go and do other things that I want to do. Not being fixated with this image that we're all familiar with of, the perfect ripped bod. That's not why I do what I do. I do what I do to try and maintain some balance, so I can go and eat a Five Guys fucking burger. So I can, drink a few beers, when the night kind of warrants it, and have a sort of balance. But it's hard to sort of, one, to literally juggle that, but also just to keep it in your mind what you're doing.
Do you still keep in touch with Jack at all?
I don't actually. He's probably really busy helping like other suffering, people who were in my position in 2017. But I should reach out to him. I've had some contact with his sponsor, who was kind of like a sort of elder within our group. I've had some contact with him, which has been nice. I think he's got like young kids now, so yeah he's probably just like up to his elbows in shit, whatever you guys do.
You'll have to send him a copy of the podcast so he can have a listen. It'd be interesting for him to hear the journey you've been on and how pivotal it was in your journey.
Yeah, that would be kind of nice actually. Yeah. Hopefully I haven't said anything bad about the program, but no, I mean I've just been. No, I don't think I have. I don't think
so at all.
No.
There's quite a lot that we haven't talked about that I want to, but in the end, I wanted to talk about your ayahuasca journey. But I think we had quite a lot of feedback from our first podcast that it was too long.
Right.
So maybe, I don't know, we should listen to that. But I think for me, what is amazing as well is what you haven't talked about actually is any goals, and I mean that in a good way, as in, in the sort of commercial corporate world, it's all goal orientated, right? And I do believe there is a place for goals, but I think what I'm sensing from what you're saying is there isn't really there's not like an end goal. Do you know what I mean? It feels to me it's like, even though, with the PT and, with coaching people, it's like, well, that's just a journey. It's not like I want that XYZ goal. Is that fair?
Yeah, and if you think about it, I think that's why like balance is kind of like really important. If you think about balance, it's like, scales on a fulcrum, right? They can go one way or the other. There's two ways that they can go. Kind of feeds in nicely to the title of the podcast, right? But, it's not like they go one, they're in constant state of flux. It's kind of a good metaphor for like, nature or the fucking universe, and it's just, that is, what is happening, and I can put a bit more eggs in one basket or the other. So that's kind of like how I, look at what I'm doing now. I kind of, of course I have goals, but I try and keep them kind of quite near term within the year. I do this thing actually where I've done it for the last 2 years, where at the start of the year, I write a letter to myself, which says by the end of that year, this is where I'll be. So dear Bruce, by the end of this year, you'll have work in a yoga studio, you'll have X number of clients, and you'll be, you'll have, I think this year it's like, you'd have lowered your living costs to this, which, is important to me because I'm a spendy bastard. So, and I'll do that next year, and it just keeps it sort of in the near term. And yeah, it's a cliche, isn't it? But it's the process. You just trust the process. I just try and show up, do the things that I know that I need to do, and that's it. And everything else should, fall into line. And I don't know where this is going to take me in 5 years. I've just started it. So how could I possibly know? And I need to be open to it going in any direction that I want. I kind of, through me letting go and just being realistic about the fact I don't have any control over that. What else can you do? There's no point in, I'm going to, because my experience is life doesn't work like that. It throws you all sorts of curveballs. So I wouldn't have it any other way.
Well, I think that's a great place to end, unless you've got any other questions. But
I've got one final question, if I can. There's time. It would be if you could write a letter to 18-year-old Bruce driving up the motorway to Sheffield. What messages do you think would be contained in that letter, based on the journey that you've been on, and any kind of key messages?
I think it would be listen to your heart more. Listen to your heart more. I think. Some of the things I've mentioned about sitting in meditation, intuition, however you want to phrase it. Our minds and our thoughts and our fears and our emotions, can really govern what we do, and can be quite dangerous and destroying at times. So, I think, listen to your heart. Yeah, that's what I tell him.
Brilliant. Well, I think from my side, I think my takeaway, obviously the the tale of the 12-step process and that journey I think is fascinating. But I think for me, what I love about this discussion is stripping back, simplifying, and just completely changing the metrics. As in, nothing's about more, nothing's about, I have to go and achieve this. It's like, no, keep my cost base really low, don't have anything that I have chaining me up, and just have a freer existence. I think that for me is an amazing story of an evolution of, you know, chasing things not potentially for the wrong reasons, but because of sort of well intended, you know, parental approval, do what everyone else is doing around me. But now to reach a position where it's like, yeah, I don't have a crazy ambitious goal, and that's what I want. So I think I really appreciate you going through the story. It's epic.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of key messages in there, and there's a lot that will resonate with a lot of people out there who have gone through similar things, albeit maybe slightly different variations of that. And I know we've met a couple of times, but it can't be easy sitting down and being so transparent and open. So thank you very much for that. And I think it's a really interesting, fascinating journey that you've been on, and I'm really pleased for where you are now and where you're headed. So thank you.
Yeah, nice one, guys. I think it's a great theme for your podcast. So yeah, I hope people enjoyed it.
Wicked.
Brilliant.
Cool, man.
Thanks, Bruce.
Nice one.
Wow, what a conversation that was.
Such a brutally honest account of a very difficult situation that I think would affect many people in the country who have been through similar paths, similar stories, that maybe aren't able to articulate it in the same way or want to articulate it in the same way. It was a fascinating listen for me.
Absolutely. And obviously from knowing Bruce fairly well, you know, I'm really proud that he's able to be so vulnerable and so open about a difficult phase, but how he sort of transitioned into actually making it into something really positive. And for me, you know, I think we said it during the conversation, it's so nice that he's not trying to necessarily attach a load of goals and, you know, load of stuff he has to do. He's just living an honest life, and I think we can all learn a lot from that.
Completely. And I've met Bruce a couple of times very fleetingly in the past, so for him to be able to sit there in front of me and divulge all of that personal information can't have been easy, so I really appreciate that he was able to do that. And I think two of the key messages that I took from that conversation were, one, that kind of transition from internal self and ego to where he is now. He just wants to help other people and do his best for other people, which is fantastic. And the other thing for me was the key message he would give his 18-year-old self, which is follow your heart. I mean, we can all take something from that, right?
Absolutely. Fantastic. Well, that's it for another podcast. We have got some really exciting ones coming up that's a little bit more focused on business from the world of music. So yeah, watch this space and look forward to some more conversations. And you know, in the meantime, there's another way.
See you soon, guys.
And thanks to Sam Hammond for our intro and outro music, Gummy by Neverlander.